to Copilot Podcasts. Today, literally today, June 22nd, 2026, the White House just signed an executive order called Ushering in the Next Frontier of Quantum Innovation. Not last week, not last month, today. And if that doesn't tell you something about the urgency of what's happening in quantum computing right now, I don't know what will. Today, we're breaking down the full picture of where the US stands in the quantum race, the national strategy, the labs and companies pushing the frontier, the private sector breakthroughs happening in real time, and the geopolitical competition that's turning this into something that looks a lot like a new space race. By the end of this episode, you'll understand why quantum computing is no longer just a science project, what the US is actually doing about it, and what's genuinely at stake. I've got someone here who has been deep in this material, and I want to start with the most basic question that I think a lot of people are afraid to ask.
So, quantum computing, everyone's heard the term, almost nobody can explain it. What is actually going on here?
So the simplest way to think about it is this. Classical computers, your laptop, your phone, process information as bits, which are either a 0 or a 1. Quantum computers use qubits, and qubits can be both 0 and 1 at the same time through a property called superposition. And they can be linked together through entanglement, which lets them process certain kinds of problems in ways that are just fundamentally impossible for classical machines.
Okay, so it's not just a faster computer, it's a different kind of computer.
Exactly. And that distinction matters a lot.
McKinsey's 2025 Quantum Technology Monitor put it well. Quantum computing enables solutions to problems that are previously insurmountable for even the most advanced supercomputer. We're talking drug discovery, materials science, financial modeling, energy systems. The market for quantum technology broadly was valued at around $8.6 billion in 2024, and it's expected to grow at 32 to 38% annually through 2030, according to Forbes. Those are massive growth numbers, and McKinsey projected quantum computing alone could reach $72 billion in revenue by 2035, right?
That's right. Their fourth annual Quantum Technology Monitor put the three pillars of quantum tech, computing, communication, and sensing, at up to $97 billion combined by 2035. Computing takes the biggest slice. And what's interesting is that 2024 was actually a turning point. The industry shifted from just growing the number of qubits to actually stabilizing them. That's a huge deal because stable qubits are what you need before mission-critical industries will trust the technology.
So we went from how many qubits can we cram in to, okay, how do we make them actually reliable? That's a maturity shift.
Exactly. And that's where the US ecosystem becomes really interesting to look at, because the American approach is fundamentally different from how other countries are doing this. According to the 2026 US Quantum Computing Company's Guide, the US leads through breadth rather than any single champion. You've got IBM, Google, Microsoft as the giants, then a whole layer of public pure plays like IonQ, Rigetti, and D-Wave, and then startups covering every hardware modality: superconducting, trapped ion, neutral atom, photonic.
Wait, there are 348 tracked quantum organizations in the US alone? I saw that number and had to do a double take.
348 as of May 2026, yeah. And they're clustered in specific hubs: 82 in the Bay Area, 24 in New York, 20 in Boston, 14 in Boulder. It's a genuine ecosystem, not just a handful of labs. And the federal money is what makes it all possible. The National Quantum Initiative has committed approximately $1.2 billion through reauthorization. DARPA's Quantum Benchmarking Initiative had 11 Stage B companies as of late 2025.
And then on top of that, just last month, May 21st, the Department of Commerce announced $2 billion in CHIPS Act incentives for quantum companies specifically.
That's a big one. $2.013 billion across 9 companies, 2 quantum foundries, and 7 quantum computing companies. IBM alone is getting $1 billion to establish a new quantum foundry subsidiary for quantum-grade superconducting wafers. Global Foundries is getting $375 million to build a secure domestic foundry that can handle multiple hardware modalities. Secretary of Commerce Howard Lutnick called it leading the world into a new era of American innovation.
So the government is not just funding research anymore, it's funding manufacturing infrastructure. That's a different kind of commitment.
Right, and that's actually a response to a real vulnerability. The IIS, the International Institute for Strategic Studies, published an analysis in March 2026 pointing out that quantum systems depend on specialized materials and components produced within narrow, geographically concentrated supplier ecosystems. Advanced cryogenic systems, precision photonics, specialized materials, these are hard to substitute. So building domestic foundry capacity is partly about innovation and partly about supply chain security.
That's a thread I want to pull on more in a bit. But first, let's talk about the national labs, because I think people underestimate how central they are to all of this.
The national labs are genuinely the backbone of the foundational research. Argonne, Brookhaven, Los Alamos, Lawrence Livermore, Sandia, these are all doing serious quantum work. The DOE committed $575 million over 5 years through 5 national quantum information science research centers, and then announced an additional $625 million for those same centers. Brookhaven leads the Co-Design Center for Quantum Advantage, which brings together over 1,500 experts across 115 institutions.
And Sandia just had a major result published literally last week.
June 17th, yeah. Sandia National Laboratories and Quantinuum published a paper in Nature reporting the performance of Quantinuum's 98-qubit commercial system called Helios. And the fidelity numbers are remarkable. 99.9975% for single qubit operations and 99.921% for 2-qubit operations. Sandia's senior manager, Mike Decore, described it as a success for the lab's collaboration efforts, saying, quote, "As a national resource, we are committed to accelerating quantum computing technology in support of economic and national security."
Okay, so for people who don't know, why does fidelity matter so much? Like, what does 99.9% fidelity actually mean in practice?
So fidelity is basically how accurately a qubit performs an operation without making an error. And the problem with qubits is that they're incredibly fragile. They can be disturbed by heat, electromagnetic radiation, vibration, even cosmic rays. When a qubit gets disturbed, it produces computational errors. So the higher your fidelity, the more reliable your computation. Getting above 99.9% is a significant milestone because it's the kind of threshold that makes fault-tolerant quantum computing systems reliable enough for real-world use actually achievable.
And fault-tolerant is the holy grail here.
It really is. The DOE's Quantum Computing Strategy 2026, a technical report from the National Nuclear Security Administration, actually says that predictions of a production-ready quantum computer by the mid-2030s are becoming increasingly credible. That's a significant statement from a government agency that tends to be conservative about these things.
Mid-2030s. So we're talking about a decade away, roughly. But the investment and the urgency feel like it's happening right now.
Because the groundwork has to be laid now. And there's another reason for the urgency that I think is actually the most alarming part of this whole story, and it's something called Q-Day.
Oh, I've seen this term. What is Q-Day exactly? Q-Day is the moment when a quantum computer becomes powerful enough to break the encryption standards that protect basically everything: government secrets, financial transactions, personal data. The most widely used standard is RSA 2048. And here's the thing that should make everyone sit up. In February 2026, researchers at a firm called Iceberg Quantum published results showing a new architectural approach that could reduce the number of qubits needed to break RSA 2048 from 940,000 down to under 100,000, and in some cases, as few as 22,000.
Wait, from 940,000 qubits down to 22,000? That's not an incremental improvement. That's a completely different ballgame. It dramatically lowers the engineering bar. Fewer qubits means less cooling, less error correction, less power. It means Q-Day could arrive sooner than most people assumed. Forbes described it as a boulder rolling toward all of us, a reference to that Raiders of the Lost Ark scene. And honestly, that's not a bad metaphor. Most experts still place the actual risk in the 2030s, but the trajectory is accelerating.
And that's exactly why the executive order signed today is tasking the FBI and the intelligence community with protecting quantum research from foreign spying. This isn't abstract.
Right. NextGov reported today that the order directs intelligence agencies to better protect quantum research from foreign adversaries, specifically naming China as the primary concern. And there's a quote from Michael McLaughlin, a former US Cyber Command official, that really crystallizes the threat. He said, "Quantum is exactly the kind of target foreign intelligence services prioritize. It is a small field, the talent is concentrated in a handful of universities and companies, and the work sits at the scene between fundamental research and national and economic security.
And then he said something even more unsettling about how adversaries don't even need to break encryption to win.
Yeah, this is the part that stuck with me. He said, "Our adversaries do not need to break encryption to win here. They can recruit a researcher, co-opt a supplier, or use private equity to buy a lab and acquire a decade of progress at a fraction of the cost." That reframes the entire security conversation. It's not just about protecting the computers, it's about protecting the people and the supply chains.
That's a really different kind of threat than what most people imagine when they think about cybersecurity. It is, and it connects directly to the geopolitical competition piece. The U.S.-China Economic and Security Review Commission published a report in November 2025 called Vying for Quantum Supremacy that laid out the stakes clearly. The key finding was that the country that achieves supremacy in quantum computing will play an outsized role in how the digital economy is encrypted, unlock transformative advances in materials science, energy production, and medical research, and secure disproportionate and likely enduring advantages in intelligence collection and precision targeting.
Enduring advantages.
That's the phrase that gets me. This isn't a temporary lead. Whoever gets there first could lock in structural advantages.
That's exactly the concern. And the Commission was direct about the current state. America still leads the world in most quantum research, but China has deployed industrial-scale funding and centralized coordination to seize dominance in certain quantum systems, particularly quantum communications, where the US actually lags behind.
Wait, the US lags behind China in quantum communications? I didn't know that.
It's one of the less discussed parts of this story. China's early focus on quantum communications was driven by security objectives. They wanted unhackable communication channels, and that centralized state coordination gave them a head start. The US has been stronger on the computing side, but the Commission's report explicitly flagged quantum communications as an area where the US is behind.
So it's not a clean US is winning story. It's more complicated than that.
Much more complicated. And the IISS analysis from March 2026 adds another layer. They argue that the quantum race has actually entered a new phase. It's no longer primarily about laboratory breakthroughs like qubit counts or coherence times. It's about infrastructure governance, who can build, govern, and scale the systems through which quantum technology will actually operate. And the US, China, and Europe are each pursuing fundamentally different models.
Walk me through those three models, because I think that's a really useful frame.
So according to IIS, the US model is about aligning innovation ecosystems with security governance and allied supply networks. It's market-driven, but increasingly security-conscious. China's model is vertically integrated technological mobilization, linking industrial policy directly to strategic planning, top-down coordination. And Europe is doing something different again, relying more heavily on regulatory coordination and standards influence to compensate for not having the same industrial base as the US or China.
So Europe is essentially trying to shape the rules of the game rather than win the hardware race.
That's a good way to put it. And the IISS warns that these diverging approaches could actually accelerate technological fragmentation. You could end up with competing quantum ecosystems that don't interoperate, which would have massive implications for global trade, security, and scientific collaboration.
That's a scenario I hadn't really thought about. Not just a race to the top, but a potential fracturing of the whole field.
And it connects to something the Belfer Center at Harvard flagged, that pathways of cooperation between the US and China in quantum are becoming more and more sparse. A researcher who spent time at Peking University talking to Chinese quantum scientists found that the competition is very much felt on both sides, and the space for collaboration is shrinking. That's a problem because quantum science has historically been a global open field.
It's interesting because quantum computing is kind of maturing in the shadow of AI right now. Everyone's talking about large language models, and this whole other technological revolution is happening somewhat under the radar.
The Belfer Center made exactly that observation. QCs are advancing while public attention is dominated by AI. But here's the thing. The US-China Economic and Security Review Commission actually pointed out that AI and quantum are converging. AI-enabled research systems are accelerating materials discovery, drug development, and fundamental physics, all fields where quantum sensing and computing will multiply capabilities. Nations that successfully integrate quantum with AI-driven research platforms will compound their advantages exponentially.
So it's not AI versus quantum, It's AI plus quantum as a combined force multiplier.
Exactly. And that's part of why the executive order signed today is so significant. It's explicitly calling for a whole of government approach, not just funding research, but accelerating deployment and commercialization, protecting sensitive technologies, and working with allies. The order gives the administration 180 days to update the national quantum strategy.
Which brings up the GAO report from March, because the GAO basically said the current national strategy has some real gaps.
Yeah, the Government Accountability Office published a report on March 18th, 2026, GAO 2610779, and it was pretty pointed. They found that the current quantum strategy doesn't include performance measures to gauge progress, doesn't specify the level of resources and infrastructure needed, doesn't describe federal agencies' specific roles and responsibilities, and doesn't integrate agency-level plans. The federal government spends about $200 million per year on quantum computing activities, and the GAO is essentially saying we don't have a good way to know if that money is working.
$200 million a year with no performance measures. That's a significant accountability gap.
It is. And the GAO's point is that updating the strategy to address those gaps could lead to more efficient use of federal resources, faster progress, and better management overall. So the executive order today is actually responding to exactly that kind of criticism. It's mandating a strategy update within 180 days.
Let's come back to the private sector for a second, because I think the company level story is where a lot of the most exciting stuff is happening. You mentioned Google's Willow processor earlier.
Google's Willow result from December 2024 was a landmark. They demonstrated logical qubit error suppression, meaning that as they added more qubits, the error rate actually went down. That had been a long-standing challenge that many thought was unsolvable. Forbes described it as showing that increasing the number of qubits actually lowered mistakes, and they verified random circuit sampling advantage on a 105-qubit superconducting system.
And then Quora had a big result in January 2026.
Quora Computing out of Boston demonstrated 96 verified logical qubits in January 2026, the largest logical qubit count globally at that point. They used what's called a high-rate code, and 3 of the 4 verified logical qubit demonstrations worldwide have come from US firms: Quantinuum with 48 logical qubits, Quora with 96, and Google with 1. That's a remarkable concentration of progress.
And logical qubits are different from physical qubits, right? This is a distinction that matters.
Really important distinction. Physical qubits are the raw hardware, they're noisy and error-prone. Logical qubits are error-corrected qubits that are actually reliable enough to use for computation. You need many physical qubits to make one logical qubit. So when Quora says 96 logical qubits, that's a much more meaningful milestone than just having a lot of physical qubits. It's the difference between having a lot of unreliable parts and having a reliable machine.
That's a really helpful distinction. And IBM is doing something different with its approach. It's more about scale and developer access.
IBM runs the world's largest commercially accessible superconducting fleet. Their Heron processor has 156 qubits, and their Condor system has 1,121 qubits. But what makes IBM distinctive is the developer reach. They've built an ecosystem around their quantum hardware that lets researchers and companies actually use it. And with the $1 billion CHIPS Act investment, they're now building a dedicated quantum foundry for superconducting wafers, which is about securing the manufacturing supply chain.
And then there's Microsoft, which is taking a completely different bet on the hardware side.
Microsoft is making what the 2026 guide calls the boldest topological bet. They're pursuing a fundamentally different qubit architecture based on topological qubits, which are theoretically much more stable. It's a higher risk, higher reward approach. They also have a co-development deal with Atom Computing, which demonstrated 24 logical qubits on a 1,180 physical qubit system using a different error correction approach called Bacon-Shaw codes.
So you've got IBM going wide with developer access, Google going deep on error correction, Microsoft making a long shot bet on a different architecture entirely. That's actually a really healthy competitive dynamic. And that's exactly the point the 2026 guide makes about why the US leads. No other country fields as many serious hardware companies across superconducting, trapped ion, neutral atom, and photonic approaches. That diversity is the defining strength. Where China concentrates effort in a handful of state-linked institutions, the American model spreads bets. If one approach hits a wall, Others are still advancing.
It's almost like a portfolio strategy applied to national technology development.
That's a great way to frame it. And the capital markets are a huge part of why this works. IonQ, Rigetti, and D-Wave are all publicly traded. Quantinuum raised about $600 million at a $10 billion valuation. And CNBC reported in March 2026 that quantum firms are going public even in volatile markets. Xanadu Quantum listed on NASDAQ. Inflection debuted on the New York Stock Exchange. Analysts quoted in that piece expect practical quantum advantage around 2028 to 2029, with wider commercial use in the 2030s. 2028 to 2029 for practical quantum advantage. That's not that far away.
It's not. And venture capital is responding. In 2024, VC invested an estimated $1.9 billion in quantum startups through 62 funding rounds. That's a 138% increase over the $789 million raised in 2023. The money is moving fast.
138% increase in 1 year. That's not gradual growth. That's a sector that suddenly got very serious very fast.
And globally, cumulative announced public investment in quantum has exceeded $55.7 billion as of 2024. The cumulative public investment is almost 3 times greater than total private investment, which tells you how much governments are treating this as a strategic priority rather than leaving it to the market.
And China is apparently investing significantly more than the US on the public side, according to Forbes. That's what the reporting suggests. China is investing significantly more in quantum infrastructure and talent than the US's $1.2 billion National Quantum Initiative. The exact figures are hard to pin down because China's investment is spread across state enterprises, military programs, and academic institutions in ways that aren't always transparent. But the scale is clearly larger.
So the US has the breadth and the private sector dynamism, but China has the raw capital commitment and the centralized coordination. Those are genuinely different strengths. And the question of which model wins is genuinely open. The IAS analysis suggests that in the infrastructure phase we're entering now, the US model of aligning innovation with security governance and allied supply networks could be more durable. But China's vertically integrated approach, linking industrial policy directly to strategic planning, has already produced real results, especially in quantum communications.
There's also the talent constraint that keeps coming up. The 2026 guide specifically called out talent as one of the main limits on US quantum companies.
It's a real bottleneck. The guide says the science is hard and useful fault tolerance is still years away, so the main limits are the engineering road ahead and competition for scarce specialists. Quantum computing requires people who understand both quantum physics and engineering at a very deep level. That's a tiny talent pool globally. And both the US and China are competing for the same researchers.
Which is exactly why McLaughlin's point about recruiting researchers as a form of espionage is so pointed. The talent pool is small enough that losing even a handful of people to a foreign adversary could matter.
Precisely. And that's why the counterintelligence piece of today's executive order is so significant. The order is directing the FBI and intelligence community to treat quantum research as a high-priority target for protection, not just the hardware, but the people and the knowledge.
So, when you step back from all of this, the executive order, the $2 billion CHIPS investment, the Helios results, the GAO critique, the geopolitical competition, what does the actual state of US quantum computing look like right now?
I'd describe it as a 3-layer picture. The first layer is the innovation ecosystem, and by that measure, the US is genuinely leading. 3 of the 4 verified logical qubit demonstrations worldwide came from US firms. The private sector is well capitalized and covering every hardware approach. The national labs are doing serious foundational work. That layer is strong.
And the second layer? The second layer is strategy and coordination, and that's where the GAO's critique lands. The federal government is spending $200 million a year without clear performance measures or defined agency roles. The National Quantum Initiative has been the backbone, but the GAO found it doesn't fully address the characteristics of an effective national strategy. The executive order today is essentially an acknowledgement that this layer needs work, hence the 180-day mandate to update the strategy. And the third layer is the geopolitical one.
The third layer is geopolitics and security, and that's the most uncertain layer. The US leads in computing but lags in quantum communications. China is investing more and coordinating more centrally. The race is shifting from who invents first to who governs the infrastructure, and the counterintelligence threat is real and accelerating. The US-China Economic and Security Review Commission put it starkly: quantum supremacy will be a critical national asset, and the country that achieves it will secure disproportionate and likely enduring advantages.
Enduring advantages. That phrase keeps coming back. And I think that's what makes this different from a lot of technology races. The winner doesn't just get a temporary edge.
Right. If you control the encryption standards of the digital economy, if you can break other nations' encrypted communications, if you can simulate materials and drugs faster than anyone else, those aren't advantages that fade quickly. They compound. And that's why the urgency you're seeing in Washington right now, an executive order signed today, $2 billion in chips investments last month, a GEO report in March, all of that is happening simultaneously.
Here's what this really comes down to, I think. The US is in a genuinely strong position on the innovation side. 348 organizations, world-leading logical qubit demonstrations, deep capital markets, national labs doing serious work. But the strategy layer has gaps that the GAO identified and that today's executive order is trying to close. And the geopolitical layer is the wild card, because the competition with China isn't just about who builds the best computer, it's about who controls the infrastructure, the supply chains, the talent, and ultimately the standards.
And the timeline is compressing faster than most people realize. Practical quantum advantage expected around 2028 to 2029. A production-ready, fault-tolerant quantum computer potentially by the mid-2030s. And Q-Day, the moment when quantum computers could break today's encryption, also in the 2030s, and potentially sooner given the iceberg quantum architecture results from February. The decisions being made right now, in 2026, will shape which country is positioned to win that race.
And for anyone listening who's thinking, this doesn't affect me, your bank account, your medical records, your government secrets are all protected by encryption standards that a sufficiently powerful quantum computer could break. This is not an abstract geopolitical story. It's infrastructure that touches everyone.
That's exactly right. And the post-quantum cryptography piece, developing new encryption standards that are resistant to quantum attacks, is actually part of today's executive order as well. The US is trying to run two tracks simultaneously: win the quantum race and protect against the quantum threat. Both matter.
We started this episode with an executive order signed today calling America a quantum superpower in waiting. And what the evidence actually shows is that the US has the strongest innovation ecosystem in the world for quantum computing, but the race is entering a new phase where governance, supply chains, and strategy matter just as much as the science. The boulder is rolling. The question is whether the US has the coordination to stay ahead of it.
And the 180-day clock on the updated national quantum strategy starts today. So we'll have a much clearer picture of whether Washington can actually close the strategy gap by the end of this year.
180 days. Mark your calendars. That's the next checkpoint in this story. Thanks for being here, and thanks to everyone listening to Copilot Podcasts. The quantum age isn't coming. According to everything we found, it's already started. The only question is who's going to lead it.